My 27th birthday dinner was supposed to be a quiet celebration, but over the clinking of champagne glasses, my mother leaned toward my dad and whispered a sentence that made my blood run cold. "Since everyone is here, have your son go change the locks at her apartment." She said it with a smirk, fully expecting me to burst into tears and beg for her approval. Instead, my brother quietly stood up, grabbed his keys, and left to do her bidding. My mother celebrated her little victory, oblivious to what she had just set in motion. But an hour later, my brother walked back into the restaurant. His face was ghost white, his hands were trembling, and he leaned over to my mother and whispered 3 words that shattered her smile forever. "Mom! Someone's in there. My name is Clara. I'm 27 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my family had a very strict hierarchy. At the very top sat my mother, Brenda, a woman whose entire identity revolved around control and image. Right beside her was my younger brother, Julian, the undisputed golden boy who could do no wrong. And then at the very bottom was me, the scapegoat. Growing up, every accomplishment of mine was minimized, while every minor mistake was treated like a national crisis. To Brenda, I wasn't a daughter. I was an inconvenient expense she couldn't wait to manage out of her life. When I moved out a few years ago to work as a graphic designer, Brenda made sure I never felt truly independent. She was obsessed with the idea that I still owed her everything. Whenever I didn't fall in line with her demands, she'd hit me with the same predictable threat. "Remember who controls your roof, Clara. I can have you out on the street by tomorrow." She genuinely believed that my apartment, and by extension my entire adult life, remained under her thumb. She assumed I was renting a unit tied to a small family trust that she oversaw, giving her the legal right to dictate my living situation. For years I let her believe it. I let her think she held all the power, watching her smugly drop subtle hints about kicking me out if I ever crossed her. She had no idea that her favorite weapon was about to backfire. For my 27th birthday, Brenda insisted on hosting a dinner at an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. I knew it wasn't out of love. It was a stage for her to show off her picture-perfect family. The moment we sat down, the passive-aggressive comments began. She criticized my career, sneered at my dress, and reminded the table how lucky I was to have a family looking out for me. I just smiled and took a sip of my wine, refusing to give her the drama she craved. My calm attitude only infuriated her more. That was when she decided to play her ultimate card. Leaning over the table, right as the waiter poured the champagne, Brenda spoke in a voice loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Since everyone is here, have your son go change the locks at her apartment." She looked at my dad, then turned her cold eyes toward me, waiting for the panic to set in. She wanted tears. She wanted me to beg her for mercy in front of everyone. Julian didn't hesitate. Reaching into his jacket, he pulled out a set of spare keys Brenda had secretly kept from years ago. He gave me a patronizing look, stood up from his chair and said, "It's time you learned some respect, Clara." He grabbed his car keys and walked out to carry out her cold-hearted command. Brenda smirked, raising her glass in a silent toast to her victory. She had no idea I was counting down the minutes. What Brenda and Julian didn't realize was that they were stepping straight into a trap I had meticulously built over the last 6 months. Brenda truly believed I was still living in that old drafty apartment tied to the family trust, the one where she kept her name on the master agreement just to hold it over my head like a leash. What she didn't know was that 6 months ago, I had quietly severed my ties with her financial web. I'd worked late nights, taken on extra freelance clients, and saved enough to buy my very own condo across town, a place she didn't even know existed. I had completely moved my actual life out of that old apartment weeks ago. All my personal belongings, my furniture, my clothes, and my memories were safely sitting in my new living room. So why was I still paying the utilities on the old place? Because instead of letting the lease expire, I had legally subleased the unit under a strict, fully documented agreement. And I didn't rent it to just anyone. I rented it to a close friend of mine, a sharp, highly successful corporate attorney who needed a quiet city residence while working on a massive local case. Brenda thought she was sending her golden boy to lock out her defenseless daughter and throw my belongings onto the curb. In reality, she was sending Julian to break into a legal residence occupied by a lawyer who knew every single tenant right and trespassing law in the book. I took another calm bite of my meal, watching Brenda beam with satisfaction. She thought she was watching my life crumble, completely unaware that she had just ordered her favorite son to commit a felony. An hour had passed since Julian left, and Brenda was practically glowing with self-righteous joy. She kept ordering expensive appetizers and making offhand remarks about how hard it was going to be for me to find a hotel on a Friday night. My father sat beside her in uncomfortable silence, while I just quietly checked my phone under the table. Right on cue, a notification popped up on my screen, a text from my tenant. "Your brother just tried to force his way in. Everything is recorded on the smart lock camera. We're proceeding." A few minutes later, the heavy glass doors of the restaurant swung open. Julian walked back in, but he didn't look like the triumphant, smug golden boy who had left an hour ago. His face was drained of all color, ghost white under the warm dining lights. Sweat was beaded across his forehead, and his hands were visibly shaking as he approached our table. Brenda's face lit up, completely oblivious to his state. "Did you take care of it, honey? Did you leave her stuff on the pavement?" Julian didn't answer her directly. He staggered over to her side, pulled her close and leaned down. In a trembling, raspy whisper that cut straight through the ambient noise of the restaurant, he said, "Mom, someone's in there. And it's not Clara." Brenda's smug expression instantly vanished. "What do you mean someone's in there? Did she bring a friend over?" "No, Mom," Julian stammered, his voice climbing an octave in pure panic. When I put the key in the lock, a man opened the door. He was holding a badge and a video camera. He said I was breaking and entering, and he called the police. Brenda froze, her champagne glass poised halfway to her lips as the color drained from her face. "Police? Julian, that's impossible. It's my property. You have the right to be there." "Actually, Brenda, it's not your property," I said, setting my napkin down with absolute composure. She whipped her head toward me with fury, but before she could scream, I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick, sealed manila folder, sliding it across the white tablecloth. "What is this?" my dad asked, his voice cracking with a sudden, deep anxiety. "That," I said calmly, "is 6 months' worth of financial records and legal documentation. You see, Brenda thought she was using the family trust to keep me under her thumb. What she didn't realize is that 6 months ago, I hired a corporate lawyer to audit the trust's administrative records. That's when we discovered Brenda had been forging my signature, diverting funds meant for my college savings, and illegally maintaining secondary access to residential leases under the trust's name." Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. You spied on me." "I protected myself," I corrected. "And the man Julian just tried to lock out. That's my tenant, who also happens to be a senior partner at the law firm handling my civil audit. The moment Julian forced that key into the door to carry out your illegal eviction, he triggered a multi-count violation of tenant rights, attempted breaking and entering, and harassment." Julian sank into an empty chair, burying his face in his shaking hands. "Mom, he recorded everything. He read me my rights and told me the police were already en route to the property. He said if I didn't get my lawyer on the phone in 10 minutes, I'd be spending my night in a holding cell." The restaurant around us hummed with polite dinner conversation, but at our table, the air had turned to ice. Brenda looked at the folder, then at her golden boy, realizing her petty attempt to humiliate me had just handed her favorite son a criminal record. My father reached over and pulled the manila folder toward him. For years, he had turned a blind eye to Brenda's toxic mind games, preferring to keep the peace rather than confront the monster sitting across from him. But as his eyes scanned the bank statements, the audit reports, and the clear evidence of forged signatures, his expression transformed from passive confusion to utter horror. "Brenda, what have you done?" he asked, his voice low and heavy with disgust. "She's lying, Arthur. Brenda gasped, her voice shrill with desperation. She fabricated all of it to tear this family apart. Julian, tell your father she's lying. I can't, Mom. Julian snapped, breaking down into tears. The arrogant golden boy was completely gone, replaced by a panicked mess. The guy at the door showed me the paperwork. He had the audit documents right there. If Dad doesn't fix this, I'm going to get arrested. My dad looked up from the papers, staring at Brenda like he was seeing her for the very first time. The illusion of her picture-perfect family was completely shattered, exposing years of deceit, manipulation, and greed. You used our son to carry out your petty, illegal revenge, my dad said, his voice shaking with anger. You risked Julian's entire future just to hurt Clara. Brenda looked around the table, desperately searching for someone to take her side, but there was no one left to manipulate. Her husband was disgusted, her golden boy was weeping in terror, and the daughter she had spent years trying to crush was sitting back, entirely untouched by her malice. The smug power trip she had built her whole life around had completely collapsed in front of the entire restaurant. I calmly picked up my purse, slid my birthday card into my coat pocket, and left enough cash on the table to cover my meal. Happy birthday to me, I whispered with a quiet smile as I stood up. I didn't wait around to watch them scramble to fix Julian's mess. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was absolute. To avoid a devastating public lawsuit and keep Julian from facing criminal charges for breaking and entering, Brenda was forced to sign over the misappropriated trust funds back to me and relinquish all legal authority over family assets. My dad took complete control of his own finances, and last I heard, he and Brenda are living in separate bedrooms while quietly working through divorce papers. Julian had to perform 200 hours of community service and pay substantial legal fees to settle out of court, a harsh lesson in blindly carrying out his mother's cruelty. As for me, I'm finally living in complete peace. Every evening, I sit in my beautiful light-filled condo, a home that belongs entirely to me, bought with my own hard work, where no one can ever change the locks or threaten my safety again. Standing up to a toxic family isn't easy, but taking back your life is worth every single step. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.